Is it a privilege to be told you're responsible for slavery even though you were born in the 1980s, 115 years after slavery was abolished in America? I recently came across a term called imposter syndrome. I didn't know what it was, so I looked it up. Imposter syndrome is defined as a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. Despite external evidence of their competence, those experiencing this phenomenon remain convinced that they are frauds and do not deserve all they have achieved. Pauline R. Clance and Suzanne A. Imes introduced the term in a 1978 article where they conducted a research study investigating the prevalence of this internal experience by interviewing a sample of 150 high-achieving women in the United States. The women explained how their success was a result of luck, and others simply overestimating their intelligence and abilities. Clance and Imes determined that the women who experienced imposter phenomenon showcased symptoms related to depression, generalized anxiety, and low self-confidence. Nowadays, more research shows that both men and women experience imposter syndrome. Not everyone has imposter syndrome, even though everyone occasionally has self-doubt. We all hear the little voice that tells us we're not good enough, but some people know when it's lying and they're able to continue on with their tasks. The people who can't shake the little voice eventually believe the lies it tells and eventually become sufferers of imposter syndrome. I should mention that it is less of a syndrome, but rather a psychological pattern of thinking. Sometimes it's also called imposter phenomenon. Imposter syndrome often starts when you feel like you don't know what your life's passion is. When you feel vulnerable and unsure of your abilities or skills, it's easy for self-doubt to come creeping in. It can also creep up on you when you start something new, like a project or learn a new skill. The thing to remember is everyone goes through growing pains when they start something new. You won't do it perfectly the first time, and that's okay. It's important not to give up, especially when the something new is something you've always wanted to do. Keep going, you'll learn from your mistakes, and eventually you'll get really good at it. I read a book called Overcoming the Imposter to learn some more stuff about the imposter syndrome. And this is from the book. And it says, the imposter tells you that although everyone has weaknesses, yours is the one that cannot be overcome. The imposter will even prevent you from seeing that weakness in other people, or at least convince you that they aren't nearly as flawed as you are. I see this in people when they fight about polar extremes of something. So, fat versus thin, fat acceptance activists, or obesity glorification activists think that they're incapable of becoming thin, even if deep down that's what some of them want. So they flip the script and say that being fat is healthy. Their movement has become so toxic that they judge each other on degrees of fatness using something called the fatness spectrum. There are 4 categories on this fatness spectrum, as used on the fatlip.com: a small fat, mid fat, super fat, and infinifat. They body shame other fat people whom they consider less fat than themselves. They're convincing themselves that their flaws are not as bad as other people's flaws. On the other hand, they preach that thin people must be happy because their lives are perfect, while body shaming the skinny bitch, the skinny mini, or the twig in the same breath. Rich versus poor. The poor think the rich have no weaknesses or problems. They think that rich people have nothing to complain about because their lives are perfect. They never stop to think that maybe the rich person started out poor. But rather than using it as a victim card, used it as a driving factor to stop being poor. Becoming rich is difficult if you do it the legitimate way, by building up a fortune honestly. It takes dedication, determination, and climbing over many obstacles to get to the end result. Critical race theorists versus colorblindness. CRT activists say white people hold all the power and black people can never get ahead because black people's weaknesses can never be overcome, while white people are perceived as having no weakness. Life must be so much better as a white person because they have privilege, they're perfect. CRT activists then preach that white people should feel bad about everything they do. What is that? Race shaming? There's a word for that. Oh wait, racism. Pure old racism being applied to real life. Judging someone by their skin tone and then attributing negative characteristics to them in order to make yourself feel superior. Is it a privilege to be discriminated against? Is it a privilege to be told you're responsible for slavery even though you were born in the 1980s, 115 years after slavery was abolished in America? Of course it's not. It's annoying and rude to be preached at like this. The common thread I see within all of these examples I've given is jealousy. When people get jealous of others, they lash out, they make up reasons to justify why they can't, and they become bullies. The imposter syndrome makes people have a distorted sense of reality about other people as well as themselves. Extreme imposter syndrome manifests in victimhood driven by jealousy and insecurity. The person becomes resentful and hateful, and everything becomes an outward attack of the things they don't like about themselves. External factors such as body size, class difference, and race become excuses for how they're feeling inside. They don't look inside themselves for their self-esteem or self-worth. Instead, they view themselves by how they think other people see them. They care too much about what they think other people think about them. And usually, what they think other people think about them is false. If you're wondering why I have a wardrobe change, it's because I got cut off last time filming, so I'm just gonna do this second part on a different day. Kevin Cockley investigated the impact imposter phenomenon has on students. I cannot talk today. Kevin Cockley investigated the impact imposter phenomenon has on students, specifically ethnic minority students. Ethnic minority students often questioned the grounds on which they were accepted into the program. They held the false assumption that they only received their acceptance due to affirmative action rather than an extraordinary application and qualities they had to offer. And this is talking about like getting into a college program. So this is one of the reasons why I hate affirmative action. I've discussed this in one of my previous videos about white privilege, but I'll talk a little bit about it here. The main reason I dislike affirmative action is because it's a discriminatory law. It's the one law in America that discriminates against race. It's a racist policy. It favors minorities and ignores white people, which is racist. But people who like affirmative action claim that it helps ethnic minorities, but I only see it helping them as physically getting their foot in the door. Emotionally and mentally, it apparently makes them feel like they don't belong there. Given this research Cockley did when he investigated the imposter phenomenon in ethnic minorities. It turns out everyone wants to feel like they've been accepted because of merit. Imagine that. Strangely, I've also heard from people who are on the left or are woke or whatever in like videos and stuff saying that, well, of course everyone wants to have merit. Of course everyone knows that you need to have merit to get into places. It's like they get upset that the conservatives say stuff like affirmative action ignores merit because they're like, well, of common sense says that obviously everybody wants to be recognized for merit. But then they go and implement things like affirmative action, which completely ignore merit. So it's like, what are you even talking about? There are a few factors that correlate with imposter phenomenon. However, they do not directly cause the imposter phenomenon to manifest in everyone who experiences them. One of the factors is family expectations, such as a dad handing over a business to a son or daughter. The person doesn't feel like they legitimately got the job despite being an adult and their parent trusting them with it. In the book Overcoming the Imposter, the author tells a story of a man who is the CEO of a supply company that distributes supplies to independent hardware stores. The man, named Rusty, was given the reins of the business by his father after learning everything there was to learn about the business. Rusty says he feels the imposter syndrome 15 years into him being the CEO, just because his dad started the company. He said he felt like the employees probably think he's only there because his dad gave him the job. Once again, I feel this goes down to merit. Rusty wanted to feel like his accomplishments were his rather than handed to him. In this case, Rusty does have merit. He has kept the company profitable and successful throughout hardships. He just feels like he didn't because of the imposter syndrome. I think a feeling of merit is a universal positive to human mental health. I'm looking at you, affirmative action. You're detrimental to mental health. Another factor that can cause imposter syndrome feelings are overprotective parents or legal guardians. When parents do everything for their children and don't let their children experience life, make mistakes, ask questions, and learn from both good and bad experiences, it can cause the child to feel like they don't know anything. The child needs to spend their childhood and adolescence doing things for themselves, with supervision, of course, but not micromanagement from the parents. My parents, thankfully, were very hands-off in my childhood, and they let me make mistakes. As a result, I've become an adult who has confidence in her thoughts and behavior. I get the little voice of self-doubt in my mind sometimes when I start a new project, but I always know it's just a learning opportunity and it's okay to fail or not be perfect, because I know that I only truly fail if I give up. I know success is attainable. I just have to keep plugging along. Graduate level coursework. I think of the common phrase, I'm not a doctor but, or I'm not a scientist but, and insert whatever profession you feel you don't have the right to talk about because you don't have a degree in it. Let me remind everyone that having a degree in something does not equate to you having knowledge in it. I have a degree in hospitality management, yet I don't trust myself to open a hotel and run it successfully. Now you might say, well, Veronica, you just proved the imposter phenomenon in yourself because you feel like you didn't deserve to run a hotel despite having the degree. I'd correct you by saying, no, my college was insufficient at teaching. I remember classes about tourism acronyms and other insignificant, impractical things being taught to me that logically I feel have nothing to do with running a hotel. More importantly, and this is the real reason I don't own a hotel, I have zero desire to do so, and you get why I don't usually mention the degree in the first place. If I really wanted to run a hotel, I would get on-the-job training, which seems like a more useful way to learn actual knowledge than a college degree, especially for running a business like a hotel. I can imagine many things happening in a hotel day to day that my college never taught me. This is different from what I'm talking about with imposter syndrome, which is more like when a content creator talks about a certain topic, but they have a disclaimer like the ones I mentioned above. I disagree that people don't have the right to talk about certain topics. Being alive and experiencing things lets you have opinions about things. This is also different from being an expert in it. I know a little bit about exercise because I work out pretty regularly, but I'm not an expert. I know what works for me, and sharing that opinion is completely fine. People can take that opinion and ignore it, or try it out for themselves. I don't have to be a personal trainer to talk about exercise, but I also don't claim to be a personal trainer. You can talk about whatever you want. It's up to others whether they want to believe it or not. You don't have to pretend that you're an expert if you're not, but you also don't have to go to the other extreme and silence yourself on a topic just because you're not an expert. Racial identities are another factor that can cause imposter syndrome in some people. I have a BuzzFeed video here. I know BuzzFeed is not a reliable source for anything, but I think this woman is being honest about her imposter syndrome based on her racial identity. So I think in this case, maybe the BuzzFeed video will actually tell us something productive. I don't want to say productive because that's giving way too much credit to BuzzFeed. Factors such as racism and doubts about one's abilities due to race can lead to the development of imposter syndrome. When I see stuff like this, definitions like this, I always think, well, who told you that your race is a factor in anything other than outward appearance? Especially in America where anyone can do or be anything. Sure, there are problems that people face. Some people are poor, some have bad families, but there is nothing in America that permanently holds you back except your own self-doubt. I'm not saying everything in America is easy, but nothing will stunt your growth faster than you standing in your own way.
For me, imposter syndrome, there was never one big moment. It was all kind of like smaller moments. One of the first ones I felt was, I went to a very diverse high school. There was like Latinos, Black people, Asian people, Indian people. And I ended up going to college in Providence, Rhode Island. I went to this liberal arts college. I was there on a scholarship. And I remember my first day of campus, it was a sea of white people. And I was so surprised. And I just thought the world was like my high school. I never felt such a lack of diversity. It was really shocking to me, and I felt insecure. I think I worked hard because I wanted to convince myself that I belonged there.
This type of complaint always confuses me. There's a train going by, so there was a horn. That's what that was. First, I'm going to guess and say Alexis identifies as Hispanic. That being said, she also mentions Blacks, Asians, and Indians as being in her high school. Blacks, Asians, and Indians don't look like Hispanic people. If this complaint is truly about belonging, why does the presence of other non-white people who are not in the group Alexis probably identifies with also not make her feel uncomfortable? So the reason why this confuses me is the narrative is always preached. I need people to look like me so I can feel comfortable. Alexis didn't say this verbatim, but the fact that she automatically felt insecure among white people makes me think she does believe this narrative. Her imposter syndrome, also known as insecurity, which she does mention, is triggered by white people? Just being around white people makes her insecure. Why? She never explains that to us. Instead, she just says, I felt insecure and I think I worked hard to convince myself that I belonged there. So I can only conclude what she actually means is, as long as the appropriate people who I've been told are the ones I'm supposed to feel comfortable around are there, then I'll feel comfortable. That's what she's actually saying.
Once I started becoming a manager and leading teams and being, the head of departments and things like that, more often than not only am I the only woman, but I'm the only person of color.
Once again, Alexis never explains why this is a problem. So she was getting work at her job. That's the main thing that should matter at a person's job. The second reason this complaint confuses me is, why is this even a complaint in the first place? Why is appearance so important in terms of race? I grew up being taught that it's what you do that matters. You can say whatever you want, but if your actions don't back it up, then there's a problem. I was never taught that anything would hold me back except myself. I think that's true. Whether people are taught that or not, eventually they'll find out that the insecurity comes from within. Individuals who live with imposter phenomenon commonly relate self-esteem and self-worth to others. Alexis thinks her race is the cause of her insecurity, and she's right. She's insecure about her race, which is the reason why she doesn't feel like she belongs. What Alexis is wrong about, however, is why she's insecure about her race. She blames external forces. All the students were white, and that's why I'm insecure. Or, I'm the only woman of color among all the men, and that's why I'm insecure. The only clue I get is that she's bought into another narrative, which she mentions at the top of the video.
There's this really pivotal scene in the Thanksgiving episode of the show Masters of None. Angela Bassett plays a mom. She's a mother to Denise. She turns to her and she says, "Honey, we're minorities and we have to work twice as hard to get half as far."
We're minorities. We have to work twice as hard to get half as far. This is the line I always hear people using when they complain about their racial victim status. It's a piece of propaganda apparently shared across minority groups that brainwashes all who are told this, that they will never amount to anything because their hard work doesn't get them nearly as far as it should. If this line of nonsense stopped being taught to minorities, over time, I think they would stop feeling insecure about their race. Alexis is a perfect example of someone suffering from the imposter phenomenon because she's bought into the narrative that everyone has to look like her in order to feel comfortable. Yet even then, it's not limited to just Hispanic people. It's no one can be white around her for her to feel comfortable. Let's just be honest, you know? She's believing that her self-esteem and her self-worth are tied to the people around her. This is false. The people around her have nothing to do with her. They most likely don't care that she's Hispanic. She's the only one who cares that she's Hispanic. The imposter knows all too well how to take the truth and bend and shape it to feed your insecurities. It will take the words people have said and insert meaning that isn't really there. Even worse, it will take the words people haven't said and convince you there are all kinds of reasons behind the silence. When I read this, I had a light bulb moment because it reminded me of things that I keep hearing in society now that drive me up a wall. Does this remind you of anything? It will take the words people haven't said and convince you there are all kinds of reasons behind the silence. Doesn't this sound like unconscious bias? The belief that other people are scheming against you and swaying others' perspectives to also be against you? It seems that imposter syndrome is at work at the root of people who believe that unconscious bias is out to sabotage their lives. Their minds are lying to them because they're listening to the little voice inside their heads that blasts insecurities at them over a loudspeaker. It will take the words people have said and insert meaning that isn't really there. What does that sound like? How about microaggression? There's no need to make up little narratives in your head when someone talks to you. How about just take them at face value? Your life would be a lot easier if you did that. This proves what I've always thought, which is that people who complain about unconscious bias and microaggressions are insecure, and they want an excuse as to why they feel bad about themselves. I found a famous person who has talked about having imposter syndrome.
I think it's just that sense that you're always waiting to be found out, that you're always, it's, for me, that's what being an actor is about, sort of going, this is all, on one level, this is all a bit silly, and I can't really believe I'm getting away with this, and at some point, someone's going to tap me on the shoulder and go, come on, you've had your fun, move on. There's some people who can actually do this. There's some proper actors in the world. Stop pretending and move on. You're a little wee nyaff from Paisley. You don't really get to do this.
David Tennant, a really good actor, says one of the things about being an actor that he feels is that because he knows he's acting, he's afraid the audience will find him out. That's not to say that he doesn't know the audience also knows the show is fictional. It's more about him feeling like the audience won't think he's acting well enough, that he won't be believable on screen.
Well, because there are no amount of good reviews that won't make you see the one bad one. And the one bad one is the one that will somehow resonate with you. You'll
be like, that's the truth.
Yeah, that's the truth. All these people who say I'm great, they don't know.
Right.
But I say that like it's a bad thing, and obviously on some level it probably is quite negative, but I don't hate it. I do see that. I think that there's an engine to that that's quite useful.
His brain tricks him into thinking the only truthful review is the bad one. It's important to note here what David says, that it's not necessarily a bad thing to see criticism.
Oh, well, I did it once on the press night of Romeo and Juliet at the Royal Shakespeare Company. It was our second press night. It wasn't quite as bad as it might have been. But again, that speaks to what we've been saying, because we'd already done a long run of the play in Stratford-upon-Avon, and the whole season moved to London, and sort of you have another kind of version of opening night. But yeah, I'd done it for 100 performances. I knew it was in there, and then I started having that.
Then what happened?
It was coming out. Now I can't remember the actual line now. This was quite a long time ago. I was playing Romeo. It was a few years back, and it was coming up, and my brain started doing that thing. Well, you don't know how this speech ends. You don't know how this speech ends, and I just sort of made a bit up.
Really?
And I'm thinking, I'm making up Romeo, Shakespeare, at the Royal Shakespeare Company, to an audience of critics who've seen this play 150 times over their careers.
They're like pulling out their...
But you know what? Nobody noticed.
You're kidding me.
Nobody noticed.
David improvised some Shakespeare lines from Romeo and Juliet at a press conference, and no one noticed. He did a good enough job of sticking to the feel of Shakespearean language that it fit. It's not the end of the world if you're put into a situation where the little voice tells you that you can't do this. Use it as a learning opportunity, like David did. He knew enough about the play and the language used that he was able to improvise and make it sound okay. If you know enough about a subject deep down, no amount of bitching from the little voice will stop or harm you.
Do you know what? Yes, this is terrifying, but it will be fine, and nobody will probably know, and you'll be okay.
I feel like trust is something that can fix a lot of the problems the imposter phenomenon causes in an individual. Trusting your own abilities and your knowledge will help you, even when your brain tries to undermine you. Our brains often lie to us, even though our hearts know the truth. Trusting that other people are not out to get you and not looking at the world as if it's trying to push you down can free you from imposter syndrome. If you look at the world as a place where you can find opportunities, as a place that can teach you things, I think it will help in seeing the positive side of life. I like what David said about, yes, this is terrifying, because that's where courage comes from. Fear as a positive exists, so that you can face the fear and do the task anyway, despite the fear. When you do this, you use your fear as a tool to become courageous. I think that's the most positive way to look at the presence of fear in your life, and that's certainly how I look at fear. That'll do it for today. I hope you enjoyed this topic, and I'll see you on the next video.